She was on her way to a girls' trip when the feds caught up with her for scamming the elderly. She spent the rest of the season sobbing that everyone was against her, but luckily, she's fighting for her life, not your approval. This is the story of Jen Shah, the real housewife whose lavish life was completely fake. Hi friends, I'm Katie, and this is Katie Does Crime. Thank you for joining me for the first time if you're new here, and hello to the usual rapscallions and reprobates. Please consider subscribing or joining me on Patreon if you'd like to hear more true crime stories. My patrons are now getting early access to all of my videos, hint hint, wink wink. Today's case is one about a fraudster rather than a murderer, and I think it's fascinating even if you aren't a Real Housewives fan. This case was recommended to me by someone who wishes to remain anonymous, because the reason they recommended this case is that they find the sound of this woman's voice so grating and are very pleased that she probably won't be on future seasons of the show. And that's not nice. I've been a casual watcher of the Real Housewives franchise since the first season of the original Orange County installment, and I cannot explain to you why. Is it that I love to hate watch shows? Is it that I love to see people who have it all and yet are somehow still train wrecks? Is it that I love to feel morally superior to people who just cannot keep it together despite knowing they're on TV? It's like, Dana, how did you not get that this is going to make you a villain?
Look at those beautiful glasses. They were $25,000. Did you know? $25,000. That's right.
And somehow, The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City immediately became my favorite series in the franchise. I've never been to SLC, I don't even like cold weather, and no one on the show even seems that rich compared to the housewives in much more expensive cities like Beverly Hills and New York. But I mean, one of the women allegedly runs a cult/church where they call her a facsimile of God, and how am I supposed to resist watching that? And that's where I found Jennifer Shah, the 47-year-old half Tongan, half Hawaiian businesswoman who actually lives in Park City and mentions it all of the time. I'm guessing that means Park City is the more expensive town. Jen's father is from Tonga, and her Polynesian mother is from Hawaii. They met at Brigham Young University, the famed Mormon college. Jen was born while the two were in college, so they sent her to Hawaii to live with her grandparents until she was 5 years old. When her grandmother became ill then, Jen returned to Utah, and she says people haven't known what to make of her since. She says, in Utah, I'm Black because they don't know any better. When classmates asked her why her skin looked dirty as a child, she tried to scrub it raw. Jen Louis married now 52-year-old former University of Utah football star Sharif Shah in 1994 after the two met in college and she became pregnant with their first son. Sharif said he'd never seen anyone that pretty in his life. Jen asked if she could bring her cousins on their first date, but somehow it still worked out for them. After a neck injury ended Sharif's football career his senior year, Jen dropped out of college to work 3 jobs while he went on to get his JD and practice law. But his work always ran parallel with his love of football, and he found ways to work with NFL players and report on games for local TV and radio stations. He went to work for the University of Utah Utes in 2012 as a cornerbacks coach and has since become the special teams coordinator. He was reportedly paid about $440,000 in 2021. A few years into their marriage, Coach Shah taught his wife that up until 1978, just a few decades ago, Black people weren't allowed to become priests nor hold leadership roles in the Mormon church. This was understandably a problem for him. So Jen left the church she'd been raised in and converted to Islam so their son Sharif Jr. wouldn't be raised in a church that hadn't always been welcoming to his people. They went on to have another son, Omar, 9 years after their first. Now, if you want to understand Jen in a nutshell, I think the birthday party she throws for fellow castmate Meredith in season 1 says it all. Jen and Meredith don't even seem to like each other all that much, but the party is clearly just an excuse for Jen to show off for the cameras. The background she has at the entrance of her home for guests to have their photo taken in front of says Shah Chalet. And what kind of person does marketing for her own home? Jen also decides to wear Meredith's favorite color and has Tongan dancers provide entertainment. You know, dancers from Tonga, a place that has absolutely nothing to do with Meredith. Of course, Jen's 3 assistants have done all of the work planning this party. Yes, 3. Anyway, on to the meat of the story. In March of 2021, the ladies were gathering in a chartered van to take a trip to Vail together when Jen got a call saying that her husband was in the hospital and she needed to leave. Just moments after she took off, the van was surrounded by NYPD and Homeland Security officers looking for Jen. Was she secretly tipped off? She and her husband say no, he really was sick. But either way, authorities caught up with Jen on the road and arrested her and her quote-unquote first assistant. They were charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. At the same time, Jen's Park City home was taken over by the feds, who escorted her young sons from the house with their hands raised. Back in the van on the way to Vail, one Real Housewives co-star said, "Too many things didn't add up, and I've suspected that something was going on for a while." In April 2021, Jen pleaded not guilty. She blamed her 43-year-old assistant for everything, saying she would have never been involved if it wasn't for him. The scheme was simple. Starting in 2012, Jen and her assistant would generate lists of potential leads for other people in on the scheme to scam. The schemers would get the victims to pay up to start an online business and then refer them to each other to offer business services like tax help, social media courses, or website design. Because the different schemers were all in on it together, they would sell each other as legitimate businesses offering real, helpful services, and then they would pay each other out when they were able to defraud someone. Because the problem was that most of the victims were elderly people, some of whom didn't even own a computer. There was never any intention to help any of the hundreds of victims create a real, profitable business. The schemers would then help each other fight anyone who tried to get a refund. The big thing here is that Jen and her assistant are accused of doing this knowingly. It wasn't something that their employees did without them being aware. It came from the top down. They and the other schemers used other people's names when incorporating their businesses and messaged each other on encrypted chat services. This is the wire fraud part of the charges against Jen because electronic communications were used in the criminal acts. The schemers sent their profits to offshore bank accounts and withdrew small amounts to hopefully go unnoticed. This is the money laundering part of the charges. Jen faced up to 20 years for one count and 30 years for the other. Suddenly it made sense why none of Jen's Housewives co-stars seemed to understand what her business was. She obviously couldn't properly explain it to them. In an interview with Access Hollywood, she said, "People will come to me and I'll invest in their companies. So we have a lot of different investments, all kinds of different things." All kinds of different things, guys. Throughout the filming of the show, Jen acted appalled that any other housewife dared question her and said, "What I have been accused of is absolutely the complete opposite of anything I would ever do in my life. If I have any fault, it is because I am too giving and I help too many people." In November 2021, Jen's assistant pleaded guilty, which Real Housewives reunion host Andy Cohen said didn't look good for her. But Jen said, "I'm fighting this. I am innocent and I will fight for every person out there that can't fight for themselves because they don't have the resources or the means, so they don't fight." See, guys, it's really that she's just selfless. When Hulu released an exploration of the case that month called The Housewife and the Shah Shocker, Jen's attorney asked that the charges against her be dismissed completely. She said that the jury pool would be tainted because the entire nation had access to this documentary, that a jury wouldn't be unbiased when even government officials agreed to be interviewed about Jen's alleged wrongdoings. The judge said nah. Jen's attorney then asked that all clips from her Real Housewives episodes be excluded from the trial. She said it was all hearsay. But then she also asked for all of the footage from the Hulu documentary, including any that didn't make it into the final cut. Now, I don't think that's a bad idea because there's good reason to believe that the team behind the documentary could have edited the footage for the most drama. But Jen, footage from your show and the Hulu show is either hearsay or it's not. You can't have one excluded from the prosecution and then say the other's fine for you to use. But this all became moot in July 2022 when Jen finally decided to plead guilty, like many others indicted in the case did before her. Jen's attorney said, "Jen pled guilty because she wants to pay her debt to society and put this ordeal behind her and her family." She only pleaded guilty to the wire fraud charge, and the other charge was dropped in the plea deal. Jen was left facing up to 14 years in prison. She was held on $1 million bond and told she needed to continue the mental health treatment she's been undergoing. Jen has said that she contemplated ending her life at one time and had to spend 2.5 days hospitalized. At the start of season 3 of The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which filmed before Jen pleaded guilty, she complained to the camera that the Shahs had to downsize their home from 9,000 to a mere 4,500 square feet. And she also had to cut some of her assistants, the Shah Squad. Unfortunately, she was also never able to hire Kim Kardashian as her lawyer. And I thought that was a joke when Jen said it, but if you, like me, know nothing about the Kardashians, it turns out that Kim was studying to be a lawyer last year. Despite this terrible setback, Jen said, "I'm doing my best. That's all I can say. I'm doing my very, very best." My heart really goes out to her. Jen wrote a letter to the judge in her case asking for only 3 years in prison. She said she had some personal painful experiences going on in her life that influenced her bad decisions. Her husband also wrote a letter saying that Jen had been very lonely and spiraling out of control. And not to be too indifferent to any mental health struggles, but I don't know anyone else who was feeling alone and decided to scam some senior citizens to deal with it. Prosecutors said the belated expressions of remorse ring hollow and recommended 10 years of prison time for Jen, the most culpable person charged in this case. Victims say her crimes ruined their marriages, forced them to remortgage their houses, made them lose their homes completely, and caused them to consider ending their own lives. On January 6, 2023, Jen was sentenced to 78 months or 6.5 years in prison and 5 years of supervised release. She sobbed at the reading of her sentence and said she plans to pay back every cent to her victims. Of course, she somehow found a little change in her pocketbook for a lavish dinner in NYC to celebrate her shorter than expected prison sentence. Or maybe, as usual, someone else was footing the bill. Jen's asking to be remanded to a minimum security women's prison in Texas called FPC Bryan, but as of right now, the final location hasn't been determined. We do know that she's been ordered to report somewhere on February 17th. Jen wasn't part of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City reunion show on January 25th due to her ongoing legal battle. She said she wouldn't be able to discuss the case nor her sentencing, and Bravo didn't like that. Jen blasted them for having no regard for her or her family's well-being. But lady, you signed up to be on a reality TV show where you make something like $7,000 per episode just to exist. And here's my favorite part of this whole thing. As part of the trial process, Jen had to disclose all of her assets. And it turns out the Shah chalet, with its name so prominently featured on the photo backdrop at Jen's party, doesn't belong to Jen at all. And in December 2022, it came out that when the authorities raided Jen's home, they found more than 50 designer pieces that were totally counterfeit. Cannells, Cartiers, Dior's, all fake. She did have some real stuff, and it was seized to help pay back the $6+ million she owes in restitution to her victims. Jen and her husband Sharif struggled in their marriage, but have sought counseling and seem to plan to stick it out. Jen's lawyer says, Ms. Shah is a good woman who crossed a line. She accepts full responsibility for her actions and deeply apologizes to all who have been harmed. But then after pleading guilty, Jen also wrote on Instagram in October 2022, "I have a lot to say, lies to correct, and people to put in their place." That doesn't sound to me like someone who accepts full responsibility. In Jen's casting tape, she says that she spends $50,000 a month on her lifestyle. But I should have known she wasn't actually that rich, because as Camille Grammer said in season 2 of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, most people with a lot of money don't really brag too much about it. It turns out that despite what her tagline might say, being Shah amazing is not the only thing Jen Shah is guilty of. She will certainly be missed in season 4, although her alligator tears will not. I know this is a little different from the kind of thing I usually do, but I'd love to know what you think about this case. Do you have any sympathy for Jen, and did you ever believe her protests of innocence? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube video. I'm just a true crime fan like you are, and I really appreciate you taking a chance on me. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you like spending this time together. I'd be so appreciative. Until next time, I'm Katie, and this has been Katie Does Crime. But luckily, she's not fighting for her life. Oh, sorry, she's fighting for her life. Is that they find the sound of this woman's so grating, the sound of this woman's voice, is that they found the sign, and had to spend 2.5 days in jail. That's not where she was. And 5 years of supersized release. In Jen's casting cape,